You can't force somebody to comprehend a message that they are not ready to receive. Still, you must never underestimate the power of planting a seed. Hello, and welcome to the Patience to Prosperity podcast, where we learn how to act in opposition of our limiting beliefs in order to reach our fullest potential. I am your host, Lizzie Arduino. I can't wait to dive into today's episode with you guys. This is one that I've been honestly most excited to tackle. By the end of this episode, you'll know the difference between acting in your ego or in your spirit or soul. And we're also going to talk about asking for help when we need it, not letting that ego get in the way, and also how to help someone who is not accepting help. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first concept that I want to talk about is asking for help when you need it. I think a lot of the times we have a stigma towards asking others for help because we view it as weakness. And this is something that I talked a little bit about in the episodes before this, so feel free to go back and listen to those episodes for more information. But you have to realize that you're only hurting yourself when you're letting your ego take the wheel, because this learned belief that asking for help is a sign of weakness has never served us any good in our life. Just think about it yourself. When has telling yourself that reaching out to someone else is a sign of weakness, when has that ever served you any good in your life and benefited you in any way? But now try to think about the times where maybe you have asked for help in your life, and think about all the things that you learned from it and the experiences that you gained from it, and maybe the relationships that fostered because of it. Because people actually like helping others. They like helping people that they care about because it gives them gratification and it lets them know that they're helping other people. They're making a difference. Just think about a time where you helped someone else and how good it made you feel. So I think first things first, we need to shed this egoic thought process that when we reach out to others, we're a burden on them and we're weak. Because that is not true whatsoever. That's just a limiting belief that we're telling ourselves. And in terms of looking at our situation now, or our past experiences, because a lot of the times when we're in a negative mindset where we know that we need help, but we're afraid of opening up and asking other people, we tend to falter to the past a lot. And we're no longer living presently in the moment. We're either anxious about our future or we're spending too much time in the past. And when we let ourselves get stuck in the past too much, it automatically makes us regret things that we did, think that we should have done something better and we would have reached a different outcome that would have been more suitable for where we are now. When in reality, we subconsciously know that everything happens for a reason, right? You hear that all the time. It's not just something that people throw out there. It's true. Everything does happen for a reason. Everything in your life builds on one another, and your experiences shape you, and what you choose to learn from your past will affect your future. So we have to stop being so stuck in the past and realize that the only thing that we can control is right now. We can control the way that we react to things and the lessons that we're willing to take from the experiences that we've been taught. Because we will look at our past experiences as mistakes, and then this just leads to nothing but guilt and shame within us. which we know translates into so many different aspects of our life, and it's just not emotions that we should be feeling as much as we do. And when we have these feelings of guilt and shame, it's because we have labeled our past experiences as mistakes or regrets. And when we have guilt and shame, it's because we're acting in opposition of what our highest self would be doing. Which, like I mentioned in earlier episodes, in order to reach your highest potential and become your highest self, you have to act like your highest self. You have to make decisions based on what the highest version of you would make. So the only time that we truly make a mistake is when we continue to make that mistake over and over and over again without learning our lesson. And a lot of the times we get similar situations thrown at us in life where we feel so confused. We feel like we just keep going through the same thing over and over again in a different font. And when we're faced with similar situations time and time again, it's because we didn't learn the lesson that we were supposed to learn from it. So just keep that in mind when you find yourself going through similar things that you've gone through in the past and that you thought you maybe healed from and got past, because that means that you need to do more digging with that situation and figure out why it keeps popping up and what you might be avoiding or what you're not learning from it. So just realizing that you're only acting as a barrier between who you are and who you can become and who you want to be when you're too stubborn to ask for help, because this is our ego taking control, and we don't want to live in our ego because that creates a life where we're never living in the present moment. And we're always either depressed, living in the past and mourning our past experiences and regretting things that we did, or we're having anxiety and we're living in the future. We're anxious about what's to come, when in reality we have no control over the future or the past. So this brings me to my main topic that I want to talk about today, which is the difference between living in your ego and living in your spirit, also known as your soul. So our ego acts out of fear. It lives in a victim, pity me mindset. It labels past experiences as mistakes and regrets or failures, and it often complains. While our spirit or our soul acts out of love for oneself and the world around them. It lives in an abundance mindset where it looks at all the good that they have in their life instead of all of the bad things that's happened to them or that are currently being presented to them. Someone who's living in their spirit takes accountability for their actions to create a different reality for themselves. Because a lot of the times we grow up in an environment that might be much harder inherently to climb the ladder up to success. And when we're in the egoic mindset, we look at that as, pity me, I'm the victim of my own life. I had to start off from the bottom while other people were already at the top once they were born. And this is going to serve us no good in our life because it's teaching us that we can find comfort in feeling bad for ourselves, which a lot of the times, yeah, that's okay to feel your emotions and to let yourself feel bad for yourself sometimes, because that's human. You're not a robot. You're not always going to be happy, and bad things are going to affect you. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But understanding that things don't happen to you, they happen for you. So if you grew up in not such a great household and you had a really hard upbringing for whatever reason, this was not the universe or God or whatever higher power you believe in making it harder for you because it wanted you to fail. Maybe you have a harder path because your calling is higher. And that's something that I will repeat until the day I die, because I truly think it's so incredibly true. The people who reach success in their life, the biggest, most successful people you could think of right now, they have probably had a pretty hard path that they maybe just don't talk about or you don't hear about much, except for maybe the trust fund babies or whatnot. But even still, like, everyone's hard looks different. Even the trust fund babies can have it hard sometimes, because even if they are incredibly talented and passionate about what they do and driven and motivated, they're only ever going to be seen as a trust fund baby, right? Whenever they reach that success, even if they climb that ladder themselves, they're only going to be seen as what their parents were. And they only made it there because they already had everything that they needed to get them there. You know what I mean? So, like, everyone's path is different, and everyone's path is hard for different reasons, but you can't get stuck in this mindset that your life is so much harder than everyone else's, and that's enough for you to just not act on it and to not try to make it better, because you have unlimited potential in this lifetime, and you have to realize that you're limitless. You're only limiting yourself by telling yourself that you're supposed to stay exactly where you are. So going back to spirit, a person who is living in their spirit and in their soul, they see beauty in their past. They see beauty in even the experiences that we label as bad or that were less pleasant. They see beauty in these because they know that it got them exactly where they are now, and that they wouldn't be the person that they are now if they didn't have these experiences. Where someone who's living in their ego falls victim to their past experiences and maybe complains about them and labels them as mistakes or regrets or failures, like I said. So the key here is that you have to become so aware of your thoughts that you're able to decipher when your ego is taking over and when your spirit is taking over, which in turn makes it so much easier to either push past limiting beliefs that are attached to your ego or act in according to your highest selves, in which your spirit is helping you do. So our ego and spirit are both there, because even a person who lives very intentionally and is very in touch with their soul and their beliefs and their morals, the ego still will fight. Like, the ego still wants to take over as much as it can. So that doesn't mean that these negative thoughts and these limiting beliefs are just going to completely dissipate once you learn to live in your spirit and to act accordingly to your soul. But it does make it that much easier to snap yourself out of it and kind of just shut your ego up when it's trying to make you believe something that isn't necessarily true. So I mentioned how when you're in your spirit, you're setting intentions. So this falls to the very mindset shift that completely changed everything for me, which was setting intentions rather than expectations, because intentions are our spirit and our soul coming through. Rather, expectations are our ego trying to take the wheel and honestly just trying to control everything that we can't necessarily control. That's our ego talking. Our ego says, once everything falls into place, I will find peace. Where spirit says, once I find peace, everything will fall into place. So just noticing the priority shift between the two and the way that we act when we're stuck in our egoic mindset. We think that we have control over things that are so completely out of our control. And when we're trying to control things so much in our life, all it's doing is adding stress, because we obviously can't as human beings. Like I said, we're not robots. Things happen to us that we're not able to see coming sometimes. We get blindsided. And when we're telling ourselves, once everything falls into place, I'll find peace, then what happens when something horrible happens to us? Because that happens in life. Then what are we going to do? Then that's going to make us spiral, and we'll never be able to find peace ever, because we're looking for everything to be perfect first before we can even take that step. Where when we're in our spirit and we're telling ourselves, once I find peace, then everything will fall into place. Then when bad things happen, we've already found our peace, so that's something that we can fall back on. We know how to calm ourselves down. We know that this feeling won't last forever. We're so sure that our emotions are only emotions and that they're not meant to stick around for longer than they're supposed to. So just understanding that awareness and ego cannot coexist. It is impossible for the two to exist at the same time. Because when we are in a state of unawareness, that is when our ego is in charge, because our brain is wired from back when our initial reactions to things were means of survival. So our brain doesn't actually know the difference between the feeling of being attacked by a wild animal and anxiously preparing for a presentation. All our brain knows is to respond to the emotions that arise in the same ways. They don't actually know how to decipher a situation from one another. So going back to one of my first episodes where I talked about the concept of neuroplasticity, since we have the ability to change our thoughts, when we rephrase our thinking and work to change egological thoughts to soulful thinking, we can kill those negative neurons and replace them with seeds of encouragement. So just remember that every time you're speaking negatively to yourself or to others, it's completely out of your ego, not your spirit. That is not coming from your soul, because our spirit is connected to our highest selves. And when our spirit takes over, we relinquish control over the things that were never in our control in the first place. And we completely surrender ourselves to the current moment we're in and find so much peace in living presently, because that's how you find peace. That is the key to finding peace right there. It's presence. So every single time your mind says the word should or have to, know that this is your ego talking. Every single time you say, oh, I should go to the gym, or I have to go to class, that is your ego talking. Instead, act in your spirit. Recognize when those thoughts come in and rephrase them in a way that aligns with your soul. So instead of saying should or have to, replace that with could or get to statements. I get to go to the gym. I get to go to class, or I could go to the gym. Give yourself an option. Don't force yourself to do things that don't feel in alignment to you. I know it's different when you have goals that you're trying to stick to, but no goal should be getting in the way of your own peace of mind, and it shouldn't be making you act in opposition of your highest self. Because your highest self would do whatever is best for them. It wouldn't make you go kill yourself in the gym for 3 hours when you haven't taken a day off in 3 weeks. Because your highest self knows that you're only making less progress when you're doing that, and you're only burning yourself out more when you do that. And I'm gonna do a whole episode on burnout and rest and all that good stuff, because it's so important to reassure yourself that it's okay to take time to yourself and to be still and to not always be doing something, because we live in a world that really just emphasizes this hustle culture and makes it seem like the only way you could ever reach your goals is if you're constantly overworking yourself. Where in reality, you're just making less progress and setting yourself back more. Because true goals are long-term goals. They're not short-term goals. And for example, I like to use a lot of working out movement examples because I think it helps put things into perspective for me, at least. And I know that in this generation especially, lifting and going to the gym has become almost a trend that people have really caught on to. And I just want you to think about the fact that when you set a goal to get that summer body, which God do I hate that term, when we set that goal to reach a certain physique by summertime, are we ever going to uphold that physique after summer and for the years beyond that? No. That's why you constantly see these trends in people trying to get that summer body, because they kill themselves until it's summertime, until they're, I don't even want to say happy with themselves, until they're somewhat content with how they look because they shaved off a few pounds from absolutely draining themselves in the process. And then obviously it was way too draining to uphold for an entire lifetime, so those habits don't stick after summer. But a long-term goal to stay active and to move your body because it's good for your mind and it's good for your soul and your overall physical health, that long-term goal will serve you so much more because you're going to always have it to fall back on. You're always going to know that when you move your body, it not only makes you feel good, it makes you feel better about yourself. It makes you a healthier person. It makes you less at a risk of getting a cardiovascular disease, like so many reasons. So I just wanted to use that as an example because it really just puts things into perspective when you look at things in terms of how it will serve you in the long run rather than how it's going to serve you right now or a few months down the line. So going on with our ego and our spirit, our ego makes pain turn into suffering. And this is because our ego tells us that we should not be suffering. And instead of allowing ourselves to feel our feelings, this makes us not only suffer, but feel guilty for the fact that it's taking us longer to heal. So when we don't give ourselves the time and the patience to feel our feelings and let ourselves experience things exactly how our spirit needs, it's making these feelings stay longer than they were welcome. So our spirit instead would recognize that an emotion is coming in and it would let it stay its course for as long as we feel that we need it. Maybe you need to get a good cry out. Let yourself cry as hard as you possibly can until you feel that release, until you feel that you can pick yourself up now and make sense of it. Maybe try to make meaning of it. Maybe try to understand your thoughts a little bit more. Pick yourself up and move on from it. You can't get so stuck in your emotions and let them just take over completely. You're letting them overstay their welcome. And when we're letting our ego take over, we're telling the universe that we don't trust its plans. We are not open to receiving anything because we're not able to handle it fully and in the way that we should be handling it, with care and with passion and understanding. Because like I said before, the ego is not in a place of understanding. The ego is in a space of unawareness of the mind and the thoughts. So our ego just wants to be in control because we're afraid of not getting what we want, and instead we're sabotaging ourselves to get nothing at all instead. So just think about that for a moment. When we're so afraid of not getting the things that we want, we instead sabotage ourselves into getting nothing. Because in some ways, that brings us more peace, knowing that we got nothing at all, than taking the risk to possibly get that thing. Which is crazy when you just realize that this whole time you've been acting against your own self. This is why we feel like our mind is constantly at a war with itself, because we're letting our egos take over. You have to shed your ego and feed your soul. Water your soul, because when we are watering our soul, we're acting in alignment with who we truly are, which brings in this whole concept of authenticity. And I know that this season may sound like I'm repeating things a lot and that concepts are just completely overlapping on themselves, and that's quite literally the point. That is why I structured these episodes to be about what they are about, and to have this whole season be about planting the seed, because I think all of the concepts that I'm bringing up in this season really coincide with one another, and you start to realize that everything is full circle. All of these things that you're feeling and these emotions that arise and these thoughts that you can't seem to shake, they all are full circle with the things that you're avoiding and that you're putting on the back burner. And the last topic that I want to dive into in today's episode is learning and understanding how to help someone who maybe is not willing to accept that help. Like we talked about a little bit in the beginning, how sometimes it's hard to ask for help, because when we ask for help, we are telling ourselves that we need help. And that's a hard thing to accept. That's a really hard pill to swallow sometimes. But I promise you that once you're vulnerable with someone else and once you let that guard down and you shed that ego, you're going to feel a weight lift off of your shoulders. So, how to help someone who's not accepting help? I understand where this place is coming from, because I've been on both sides of this before. And it stinks. Both sides really suck, because when you want to help someone so badly and all you want is to take their pain away, but you can't seem to understand exactly how to get through to them, it's because they're not accepting this help. It's because they're living in their ego right now. And when people are living in their ego, it's very hard to reach them. And they're often not going to accept the help that's offered to them, even if they know deep down inside their soul that they need it. So first, you need to understand that it is absolutely impossible to single-handedly fix someone. It is never your obligation, nor is it ever in your cards to fix another human being. That is not what you were put on this earth to do. Sure, you can guide someone else and you can help them understand their minds better and you can make them feel supported, but you can never truly fix how someone's brain is wired. Because just think about it, when someone goes to therapy and a therapist's literal occupation is to help others in terms of their own mindset and thoughts, does that mean that when someone goes to one therapy session, they're going to have an epiphany that changes the whole rest of their life and all of their problems are just going to completely go away? No. So why do you think that you would be able to change someone? I don't mean for this to come out as harsh, but sometimes the truth is really hard to accept, and we have to accept that we can't completely change this person no matter how much we want to take their pain away, because not only is it only going to probably frustrate them more, but it's going to cause you even more pain because you're setting an expectation on yourself that you're able to act in this higher power and reframe this person's mindset, when that is not something that you were able to do in the first place and that any one of us can. So what can we do then? Let's talk about the things that may help that person, even if we can't completely take away their pain and fix their egoic negative mindset that they're in. Sometimes all we can be to someone is a listening ear. And by letting ourselves be okay with just being that support for someone and reminding ourselves that this is more than enough. This might be exactly what that person needs right now, is just someone that they can vent to about what's on their mind, and someone that truly cares about them and wants to try to understand what they're going through. When we set the intention to become a listening ear for someone else rather than try to fix someone else, we are not only creating a really beautiful connection between ourselves and this person, but we're also self-inflicting this gratification on ourselves that we're able to support someone that we love, and that people feel better after they talk to us, which is such a beautiful and powerful thing in itself, that someone can leave a conversation with you and feel a little more hope in their life and a little more peace of mind. That's such a superpower that you hold, and you're not giving yourself enough credit for just being a listening ear sometimes. So another tactic that I like to use when talking to people is asking whether they need advice or whether they just need to be heard. Because a lot of the times we so badly want to take someone's pain away that we falter to lecturing them and just overly bombarding them with this advice that we think is going to help them. And don't get me wrong, it always comes from good intentions, right? Like, we're only trying to help this person, but it's like the concept of telling someone who has absolutely no will to live that things are going to get better and that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, it's coming from a good place and it's coming from your heart, but when that person can't even see a glimpse of light at the end of the tunnel, all that's doing is frustrating them more, because obviously they wish that they could see that and they wish that they could believe that, but the fact that they can't is only making them more frustrated. So that's why I like to ask people whether they want advice or they want to be heard, because I'm pretty confident in the sense that I am able to give pretty good advice to people, because I've gone through a lot in my life, and I've gone through a lot of mindset shifts, and I've done a lot of inner work, and all of the healing that I've done has been on my own. So I like to think that I'm able to empathize with people when they're going through similar things as me. And sometimes I have to catch myself and be like, Lizzie, these people might not want to lecture from you right now. Just because you're in a good place and because you found the light at the end of the tunnel doesn't mean that it's gonna make them feel so much better, So that's just food for thought. But just making sure that when this person is talking to you, you are validating their feelings and their thoughts. You're telling them that everything that they're going through is valid and that they shouldn't feel bad for feeling their feelings. Because the worst thing that you could do is tell them that they shouldn't think that way or they shouldn't be feeling that way. Because it's not necessarily that they want to, they just have wired their brain to think negatively and to fall on their ego and listen to their ego more than their spirit. So another tactic that I like to use is asking them questions. When they express a certain thought to you, ask them a question about it. And maybe it's not something that you're so much as curious about, but rather you want them to become curious about. Because when you ask them questions, this can help them understand their thoughts more. Because a lot of the times when you're acting more in your ego than you are in your soul, your ego might be in control to the point where you won't be able to respond honestly because you don't even know what is true. So oftentimes when we're faced with this person that we care about, that we want so badly to help, but they're not accepting that help, they will tell us stories sometimes that may not necessarily be true because it's their ego talking. Maybe they're telling you something that is putting themselves more as the victim in the story, when you know that the real story had a lot more to do with their reaction towards it, and they weren't so much of a victim as they're making it seem. But it's not up to you to completely call this person out all the time, because that might, and it most likely will just lead to them retaliating and fighting you on it. And that's not going to necessarily help something get through to them. But just recognize that eventually they'll come to their senses, and remember that it's not your obligation to fix them. Another thing is letting them know what their options are. Because a lot of the times when we're stuck in a negative headspace and our ego is taking the wheel, we often forget that we're limitless and that we have unlimited potential. So we get caught in this black and white thinking where there's only two options. There's only two paths that we can go down. For example, you're faced with the decision to go to college. A person that's living in their ego has this black and white thinking where they think their only options right now are either going to college or living at home and rotting for the rest of their life. It's hard for them to understand that they have so many options. They can go out there and find a job that's suitable to them, or at least is just generating some income for them. They can go to trade school. They can do online school. They can go to community college. You have so many options. And I'm just using college as a hypothetical situation here, obviously. It's just an example, and feel free to use any example to make that make sense to you. But it's important to understand that your frustration with not being able to get through to this person is completely valid, because when someone has black and white thinking, it's really hard to provide them more options when they're not able to accept that they're true in the first place. But it does not hurt to plant that seed for them and to let them know that there are other options, and that they're limiting themselves by telling themselves there's only one right way to do things. Because there's no right way to do anything in life. And there's no shortcuts in life either. You figure it out as you go. You can't have it so ingrained in your brain that you should have everything figured out, because no one has it figured out. We're all just learning as we go. So just doing your best to try to empathize with this person, put yourself in their shoes, and give them the benefit of the doubt. Because as a person that is living in their spirit, that's trying to get through to a person that's living in their ego, it can be really frustrating. Like I said before, it's coming out of love. Like, you just want to take that person's pain away and help them understand that they don't have to live this way. But you can't let your frustration with wanting to help them translate into overwhelming them completely and bombarding them. Because forcefulness and bombarding them will only backfire on you both. People don't like being told what to do. So when you're telling someone, oh, you should do this and you should do that, don't you think they hear that enough in their egoic brain, where their mind is constantly being mean to them and constantly telling them that they should be doing something else than what they are currently doing, because they're never living presently? So just think about how that would translate when they're also hearing it come from a person that cares about them. And I know that even hearing all of these ways to try and help someone can be overwhelming, because you feel like you almost are walking on eggshells when you're trying to help them, and like you're trying to like put these pieces of a puzzle together to perfectly make something stick in their brains. But that's not up for you to determine. That's up for their own perception. And like the quote in the beginning of this episode, you can't underestimate the power of planting a seed. When you set the intention to plant that seed, let it foster, let it sow, let it do its thing. It's not up to you to forcefully make that thing grow and overwater it, because that's only going to kill it. So just being patient with that person and with yourself, giving yourself the time and the reassurance, and giving that person all the time that they need to take in order for that seed to plant in the first place. Because a lot of the times it takes a while just for something to stick. And I've said this before, a lot of the times I repeat things throughout episodes and continuously over and over again because it takes a while for things to stick with people sometimes. And when we hear things the second or third time, it might affect us differently than the first time. So that's not to say that you should be constantly telling this person the same thing over and over again, but just being patient with them and understanding that everyone grows at a different pace and everyone's path is different. Not everyone works the same way that you work, and not every single thing that's stuck with you is going to stick with someone else, but it's worth a try, right? It's only coming from the good in your heart. And another thing that I just quickly want to mention is that you have to establish some sort of boundaries with yourself and with this person, because if you don't, you're going to be left feeling depleted for not being able to get through to this person. So maybe your boundaries look like telling yourself that you have this one intention. Your intention is to plant that seed, and you're not going to set an expectation on yourself that is further than what you're maybe capable of doing, because then you feel like you failed yourself and them. And who is that really helping then in the end? So setting that boundary, telling yourself that the best you can do is be a listening ear, using the tactics that I talked about today, and just trying your best to be a support system for this person. Because at the end of the day, sometimes that's all we can really be. And I just want to leave you with this thought that as the person wanting to give someone else help, talk to someone else about your frustration. Because your feelings are valid too, and you may be able to gain a lot from someone else's perspective on the situation by talking it out and letting them know that how much it's frustrating you, that you just want to help this person and you can't seem to get through to them. So maybe determining a person in your life that you feel comfortable with venting to and you feel understood when you talk to them, and identifying who your listening ear is, because that's just as important. You have to look out for yourself too, and know that I'm always a listening ear for you. My DMs are always open for any brain dump that you need to put out there. I'm always there for you guys, and I really appreciate the support that you give me, and I want nothing more than to just be able to give that to you. So that's all for today's episode. I really hope that something from this episode stuck with you and was able to resonate with you. And whatever side of the equation you're on right now, whether you're the person that's finding it very hard to reach out and ask for help, or you're the person that so desperately wants to help someone else, give yourself grace and be patient with yourself. And understand that there's so much to learn in both of these processes. You're going to come out of the other end as such a better communicator and a better person, and you're going to understand yourself and others so much deeper by giving yourself grace and the time that it takes to reach this prosperity that we talk about in this podcast. So thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. I'm so grateful for the audience that I'm creating here and the community that we're building. If you enjoyed today's episode, please follow the show to engage in further episodes and be updated when I publish. And share this episode with anyone that you think may be needing to hear it or might just enjoy the topic in itself. Because a lot of the times people will get different meanings from these episodes than you might. So sharing them can go a long way, and that's why I like to say it at the end of every episode, not so much because it helps me out, because it does, but it also is just so beautiful to be able to spread messages to other people without even directly saying them, and just letting people perceive things in their own way of thinking. But anyways, I feel like I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, so I'm gonna just leave you guys with that. But thank you so much for listening. I'll see you guys next week.